Well, it's a beautiful day here in Athens, Texas. It's so good to see everybody here. Welcome to all those that are tuning in on the stream or that will be listening in later. This is a brand new building. Right behind me is a beautiful lake and a great camp setting. So pray for good weather, safety, and also for a successful camp. I want to begin the Bible study today. Let's go to Joshua 24, verse 15. You see the words hung up behind me, the theme for camp this year. But let's head there. After Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, we come to Joshua. In the last chapter in the book of Joshua, Joshua 24, and verse 15, it reads, "And if it seems evil to you," and this is Joshua talking, "if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, which were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Many of you have this phrase posted in your home. We have it when you come in the front door of our home, right up there on the wall. "But as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord." And it's one of the most famous scriptures in the Bible. Certainly, this is one of, if not the most famous speech that Joshua ever gave. And this speech was given at the end of his life. Joshua was 110 years old when he gave this speech. And it was a powerful speech, and he'd gotten the leaders together. And Joshua was one of those good men and strong leaders that we can learn from in the Bible. And today, we're going to spend some time looking at his example and learning from it. Right now, you're a young person. You're not yet married. You don't yet have a home of your own. But someday soon, that will change. And it'll be amazing how quickly that changes. You grow up, you get into school, you graduate from high school, maybe you move on to college or trade school or get a job. But it seems like time flies, and before you know it, you're married, and before you know it, you have kids, and before you know it, you have family. Right now, you, again, are a young person, and you don't have that, but you likely live in a home, a church home. And are you, as a young person, living in a godly home? Are you living in such a way to honor your parents and to honor God? Is that household that you live in a household that upholds God's laws, that lives according to God's way of life or not? And how do you contribute to that? As a young person, are you contributing to a household that can be described like Joshua described his? Sometimes in the Church of God, being a pastor and traveling around and also working with kids in the church and imperial schools, we see some excellent examples of families that uphold God's laws, that follow those laws, that enforce those laws in their home. And God blesses those homes. In the end, those are the people that survive trials and tests. Those are the people that God can use in His kingdom. And it's important that we learn to live that way as a young person, and also when you have the responsibility of having a family, that you uphold God's laws in your home. When we look at qualifications for leaders in the church in the New Testament, one of the things that is listed is, do they rule their house well? Do they rule their homes well or not? And basically it makes sense. If you can't even take care of your own family and rule that well, how can God give you a city or 5 cities or 10 cities in the world tomorrow? How can we give you a leadership position in the church when your own home is a disaster, when your own family is not following God's way of life? I realize there comes a time where your kids grow up. Both my sons are grown and married and have kids now. They live on their own. They don't live at the house. They have to make their own decisions. Now, as a father, I'm going to weigh in until the day I die. Sometimes they may not like what I have to say, but I'll say it anyway because I care about them and I care about the family. And that's part of my duty as a grandfather and as a father, is to give good direction. Abraham was really good at that. And Isaac and Jacob descended from Abraham, and those families were godly families, and those examples are good examples. We see a number of people through the years, at least the years I've been in the church, where people walked away from this. People turned their back on God. People went back into the world, back to Christmas and Easter, and back to its customs. Joshua was very bold here, and he said, look, you guys choose, but this is what I will do and my household is going to do. This is the path that we're going to follow. I want to take a look at the example of Joshua, and we don't have time to read the whole story. It's too long, but we'll look at some highlights in the life of Joshua today and look at his example. What did God accomplish through Joshua? And God, one thing we have to understand is God works through individuals. God accomplishes things. He uses individuals as instruments or tools in his hand if they're close to him and if they yield to God and if they're trying to uphold and promote God's way of life, then God can use them in a powerful way. And they can't accomplish the miracle. I can't accomplish the miracle. I anoint people. I can't heal them. God does that. But hopefully he can use me as a tool in his hands to do my job that he commands me to do, and then he takes care of the rest. In life, you'll learn that your successes are really blessings that come from God. After all, God owns it all. God made it all. He gives us good blessings and things. But I have known people who are successful businessmen and entrepreneurs in the Church of God, and they regularly give success, the credit for success to God. They realize God gave me all this. Yes, I worked hard. I did my part, but at the end of the day, I could have worked hard. I could have done my part, and this could have failed. But instead, God blessed it. And they give the credit, they give the glory to God. Joshua was one of those guys. And we see Joshua, even as a young man in the Bible, obeying God, following God's laws, walking in the path of righteousness. Was he perfect? No. Do we read about some flaws in his character? Yes. God put those in there too. But generally speaking, Joshua was a man of faith and courage. He was a man that followed God, one that promoted God's way of life, and one that always was turning people to God, turning people to righteousness. And that's what we try to do at camp. You know, if we didn't rule camp well, and we just let it be chaotic, we let it be a disaster, then God would hold us accountable for that. If we're parents and we let our household be chaotic and a disaster, and a household that is not upholding the standards and values that we read about in the Bible, then God holds us accountable. And again, as young people, you can contribute or you can take away or detract from your household and from that blessings or curses that come. But what did God accomplish through Joshua? Just a few things, and again, I'll list some of them. Joshua was the one who took charge of Israel after the death of Moses. When we read the story of the 40 years wandering, we see that the one that succeeded Moses was Joshua. Even Moses was not allowed to go into the promised land. God said, look, man, you made a mistake here when you got angry and you demanded of me water from a rock, and you're not going into the promised land. God used Moses in a powerful way. God will use him in a powerful way in the millennium and beyond. But he was not allowed to take the children of Israel into the promised land. He could see it. He brought them to the very edge of the promised land, but God said, no, you're going to die, and Joshua is going to succeed you. He's going to be in charge of Israel, and I'm going to use him to move forward. It was Joshua who gave instructions to carry the Ark of the Covenant across the Jordan River, and when that happened, that river parted just as the Red Sea had parted back in the days of Moses when the Israelites left Egypt, and that showed all of Israel that God indeed was working with and through Joshua. It was an incredible scene, and he was the one that said, hey, go, and God parted the sea. Joshua was the one who led Israel around the city of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. And if you remember that story, it didn't happen with one lap around the city. It didn't happen in one day. it'd be the next day and the next day. And they kept walking around that city, and finally the walls came down. But it took a little faith. It didn't happen instantly. God may have been testing them a little bit, but Joshua was the one that was leading the people, leading the charge as they walked around the city of Jericho. God used Joshua to lead Israel's conquest of the Promised Land. He was the commanding general that was used to go ahead and conquer the Promised Land and take it over. And we see that God does this in different parts of history. He takes away lands and he gives it to somebody else, and he gives lands to people and takes it away. So if the Israelites were obeying God and they were on track and their households were like this, as for me and my house will fear the Lord, and they were doing the right thing, God blessed them. And often he would deliver them from slavery and then give them tremendous blessings. And he would replace the people that were already there, and he'd drive them out of the land and give it to Israel. It's much like what happened in America when God gave the blessings to the descendants of Israel. He drove the Indians and others that were already here out. They were deeply involved in pagan worship and all kind of things, worship of animals and idols. And God said, no, you're out, and the Israelites are in. God gave it to us. We see that throughout the pages of the Bible, and God can give and God can take away. And God always blesses obedience. He always blesses people that look to him and follow him. And sometimes they go through hard trials and tests. Don't get me wrong, that'll happen. But those tests, those trials are designed to strengthen character and make us better. And God's got to test us. He's got to know where we stand, what we'll do when tested. Will we do the right thing or will we do the wrong thing? Joshua had an incredible impact on the nation of Israel. And we see the very first time that we hear about Joshua in the Bible is during the second month of the Exodus. And under Moses, we see that Israel was led by Moses by way of the Red Sea out of Egypt. And after God divided the Red Sea and he allowed them to go through, and he killed the pursuing Egyptians that followed behind him. And by the way, when you read that story, I'd love to see a video of that maybe in the future if God could just, can we go back there and take a look at that? That'd be pretty cool. It said there was a wall of water to the right, a wall of water to the left. God dried that path up because otherwise you would sink in it. It'd be, wet and miry and muddy at the bottom of the lake or the ocean or the sea in this case. And allowed the Israelites to go through, and then in come the Egyptians, right, with their chariots and horsemen, and they're going to wipe out the Israelites. And then God let the water seep back into the bed, and it took the wheels off the chariots. And then he allowed these walls of water to come back, and it killed all the Egyptians. I've seen documentaries where they said, well, there's a sandbar about 6 or 8 feet deep there. That is just not true. I've been in waves, and many of you have been in waves in California that are 6 or 8 feet, and they don't kill you. They might toss you around like a rag doll if you're out there surfing and you catch the wave wrong, but those aren't the kind of waves that would kill an entire army. This was a giant wall of water on each side that came back with tremendous force and wiped them out. But again, Joshua was there when all that happened. He lived through that. He was a part of that. Again, the Israelites journeyed from there to the rugged mountains of the southern Sinai, and they camped in a plain called Rephidim. And at Rephidim, Israel entered into their very first battle against hostile forces. They were the Amalekites. And in this battle, we read that when Moses held his hands up high, Israel was victorious. And whenever he got tired and he couldn't keep his hands up and they began to fall down by his sides, then the Amalekites began to be victorious. Finally, at the end of the day, we see Moses sitting on a rock. We see Aaron on one side. We see on the other side. And they're holding up Moses' hands, and Israel wins the battle and they're victorious. But during the battle, we see that Moses appointed Joshua the commanding officer in the field. You're going to lead the troops into battle. And Let's go to Exodus 17 briefly and just look at two verses. Exodus 17, verses 9 and 10. Exodus 17, verses 9 and 10. And Moses said to Joshua, "Choose us some men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." And so Joshua did as Moses said to him, and he fought with Amalek. And Moses and Aaron and went up to the top of the hill. And so it was, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. And Moses' hands became heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and supported his hands, one on one side, one on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek with his people with the edge of the sword. Now, Joshua was untrained, right? They had been slaves in Egypt. They had come out of Egypt. They weren't out very long before this battle ensued. And if you're the commanding officer of a bunch of troops that haven't been trained, they've been slaves for a long time, the odds that you win that battle are about zero when you're fighting against a trained group of men. And Joshua understood that. And yet Joshua did what? He took the command that he was given from Moses, and he did what he was told. You know, it wasn't his military strategy. It wasn't his military prowess. It wasn't that he had a great trained army with good troops. They had none of that. And yet Joshua knew that he had a job to do. And, you know, you could say, man, that's a suicide mission here. This doesn't make any sense. But Joshua didn't look at it that way. His whole life he had spent trying to do the right thing, trying to obey God. He knew that God would be behind him. And he gave the glory and he gave the credit to God. And he learned a powerful lesson here in this battle that I'm sure stuck with him the rest of his life. That is, trust God for deliverance and get in the fight. You've been commanded to go do it. You know, God has basically put us in a battle. We're in a spiritual battle. We're in a battle against Satan and a corrupt society that's getting more corrupt every day. We battle our own carnal human nature, right? Satan's society and the self. And it's not easy. We're in a battle. And you could say, man, the odds are stacked against you. But we know with God's help we can overcome, right? Satan and sin. We can do the right thing. As a young person, God's Spirit's with you. God's working with you. It's not yet in you. You haven't been baptized and had the laying on of hands, but someday that'll happen. If you pursue this way of life, if you stay in the fight, and then God can use you in a powerful way. And we see many examples of young people in the Bible that God used in miraculous ways, incredible ways. And they became stronger and stronger in character as time went by, and God smiled on that. He goes, look, this is what I'm looking for. And as a young person, you want to be one of those people. You know, I remember in the 70s, in many cases, it wasn't cool to do the right thing in the church. I remember going to church campouts and people would smoke pot and do things, you know, guys were in girls' tents and things like this. I mean, there were some problems in the 70s when the church got off track. And some people did the wrong thing. I mean, they were happy to, oh, man, we have freedom, we can do whatever we want. And they got in trouble. They did things they shouldn't have done. I remember one particular leadership conference I was headed to, and I'm in the car with 5 other guys, and we're in a caravan, and everybody in the car is high, except me. I knew better. First of all, I had a dad that it would not have been worth it for me to have done it with my dad, because when he found out, it would have went very badly for me, and I knew that. But secondly, I didn't want to do the wrong thing. I knew it wasn't right. I was the youngest guy in the car, but I knew it wasn't right. I didn't want to be a part of that. I didn't want to. I was also, you know, involved in sports, and I'd like to be able to breathe. I mean, if the guys I know who smoked a lot of pot, we called them potheads, but they couldn't run the bases without, you know, gasping for air. because of all the particles in their lungs. I'm like, what are you doing? That's not very smart. But you will be tempted in life to do things like drugs, especially now that it's legalized, in so many states. And one state after another is falling. Don't go down that path. Don't go down that path. It's a path of destruction. And you won't be living according to God's way of life and His values. And it will not only impact you, it will impact people around you. Back to the story of Joshua. Joshua was also selected as one of the spies to go spy out the promised land. Israel had gone from Egypt nearly 6 months. And Moses sent a group to spy out the land of Canaan. And he wanted a report. He wanted a report on the conditions of the land. He wanted to know what the weather and the crops were like. He wanted to know who lived there and what kind of people they were. And so 12 men were selected for the job, one from each of the tribes of Israel. And the representative from Ephraim was Joshua. Caleb was another one. He represented Judah. And the story is told in Numbers chapters 13 and 14. And let's go there briefly. Numbers chapter 13 and 14. This is a notable event in the life of Joshua. And we're going to start here in verse 25. It says, and they returned from spying out the land. This is Numbers 13:25. They returned from spying out the land after 40 days. So they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Now, it was an incredible trip. We see back in verse 23 that they cut down a branch with a cluster of grapes, and it took 2 men basically to carry the cluster of grapes on a pole. You can see these 2 guys with this, pole on my shoulder. Somebody's behind him. He's got it on his shoulder. And this cluster of grapes is so large, that's how they have to carry it. I mean, this was truly an abundant land, and that's just an example of what it was like. And it talks there about pomegranates. It talks about figs. And it's likely that the spies arrived in about September. This would have been fall when all these fruits were in full harvest mode. And it was quite an amazing land. And God had said it was a land flowing with milk and honey, and it indeed was. It was everything and more that they expected. And God had promised to lead them into this land, into the promised land. And it's likely, again, that when the spies got back, they were pretty excited about what the land looked like and what the produce looked like, but they were afraid of the people, as we'll see. Notice what it says here in verse 27. And they told him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea along the banks of the Jordan. And then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. This is the attitude that God loved. Joshua and Caleb were these guys that had that kind of attitude and approach. And look, God's for us. He's giving this to us. Let's go take it. Again, we're not talking about an organized military here. We're talking about people that had been in slavery and now they're wandering in the wilderness. But when God said, hey, this is yours, go take it, these guys believe that with all their might. We live at a time at the end of an age where there's very little faith. And people think like the Israelites. They don't think like Caleb and Joshua. They think we can't do this. This is too hard. We don't stand a chance. This can't be done. But Joshua and Caleb had an incredible different attitude. It says that the men who had gone up with them said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land, which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it were men of great stature. There we saw the giants. The descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. And all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt. It's mutiny. They conspired against Joshua and Caleb. These people had no courage. They had no faith. You know, we live in an age that's very much like that today. Do you want to be a Caleb or a Joshua? I do. I hope you do. I hope our actions match our words. There have been a lot of people, even ministers in the world, that have given powerful sermons on faith and courage. And then as soon as they get put in a situation where their faith or courage is tested, they're all cowards. They all turn tail and run. They're just like the Israelites. They all murmured and wept. We can't be those people. We've got to be different. We've got to be more like Joshua and more like Caleb. You know, they feared entering the promised land, and God says, look, it's right there. Take it. I'm giving it to you. Now, you're going to have a little faith. You're going to have to trust me. Yeah, if you look at the inhabitants, you don't really stand a chance, but don't forget who I am. I'm God. And I'm the one telling you, I'm giving it to you. Now go take it. And Caleb got that. Joshua got that. You know, it says in verse 8, if the Lord delights in us, then he'll bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Look, don't rebel against God. Let's go. And the same thing can be said, hopefully, about you and I here at the end of an age, because our faith will be tested. We will have challenges. You know, after this event, God had to teach the nation of Israel a lesson. And they refused here to go into the land that God had prepared for them. So God made them spend 40 years in that parched, barren, desolate wilderness of Sinai. You know, God says 1 year for each day that the spies spied out the land. 40 is a number in the Bible that represents trial and testing. Some of you have camped. We're going to have an adventure camp this year, and we'll be in the backcountry for 5 days, sleeping in tents. You know, we've been in the backcountry. We get snowed on. We get rained on. It gets windy. After about 5 days and you come out, it's really nice to sit on a toilet. It's really nice to sit in a real chair. It's really nice to lay on a real bed that's kind of comfortable instead of rocks and tree roots and stones. You know, it's a pleasure to come back out. 40 years is a really long time to live in a desolate, barren wilderness. And it was the consequence for this attitude and this lack of faith. Joshua didn't have that. We got to be more like Joshua, more like Caleb. We see that all those who had been 20 years of age or older at the time of the Exodus died in the wilderness. God said, look, I'm done with you guys. You murmur, you complain, you're negative, you don't trust me. I can't let you into the promised land. And, you know, the same could be true for God's people today. You know, God says, you know, watch and pray that you may be counted worthy to escape the things that are going to come to pass. If we're like Joshua and Caleb, God goes, you're worthy to escape. I'm going to count you worthy. Come on in, I'll protect you. Get your final training, and that'll be exciting. And it probably won't be very easy, which, you know, we'll see how people deal. But also, we're not going to enter the real promised land, the kingdom of God, if we don't get it right. It says in the Bible that they didn't enter because of unbelief. The same would be true for us. We're not going to enter the kingdom because of unbelief if we're one of those unbelievers. We don't have any faith, don't have any courage, and we don't trust God. You know, God is almighty. He's not like a father to his children. I mean, little kids look up to their dad, look up to their mom. They depend on them to protect them and look after them and defend them. And as a human being, we would do all we could, but we can't do what God does. We're not bulletproof, right? We might think so, we'd act so, but we're human. We could die, something bad could happen. With God, not a chance. He's got it. He's all-powerful. We want God on our side. We want God to be pleased with what we're doing. We want you, as young people, to be people who contribute to a household that's serving the Lord. And when you have your own family and you have your own wife and kids, we hope that you uphold those standards and values. And we hope that our parents are upholding those values now in their home. All of my kids grew up in the church from the time they were born. Like I said, both my boys are moved out, but more than once I told them, look, if you don't do the right thing, you'll find all your stuff on the front yard and you don't live here anymore. This is my house. We will serve the Lord. We're going to do the right thing. And they never pushed that, right? They wanted to do the right thing. They decided, this is my life. I agree with this. I want to be a part of this. I don't want to go against this. And it never happened. I grew up in the church. I love God's church. I love God's way of life. I look forward to church services and YOU activities back then, or camps, when I could go to them, and valued it. And I hope that you do. Joshua was appointed a leader, and we see that when Joshua took over after Moses, that he continued to be faithful to God throughout the 40 years of wandering and beyond. So when Moses was 120 years of age, Israel reached the Jordan. And let's go just briefly to Deuteronomy 31 and read about that. Deuteronomy 31. And let's start in verse 14. It says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, the days approach when you must die. Call Joshua and present yourselves in the tabernacle of meeting, that I may inaugurate him. So Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tabernacle of meeting. Let's go down to verse 23. Then he inaugurated Joshua the son of Nun and said, Be strong and of good courage, for you shall bring the children of Israel into the land of which I swore to them, and I will be with you, God told him. So God said, look, be strong, be a person of strength and courage. I'm with you. And the stories are amazing. Sometimes God used hail to drive people out and kill people, the enemy. Sometimes he used hornets. Like, can you imagine that? God's using hornets to drive your enemy away. Like, if you've ever gotten into a hornet's nest, Mr. Plagenza can tell you he recently did. I think his one hand still is pretty swollen up. But if you get into a hornet's nest and they get a good grip on you and tear you up, you get a bunch of bites, you can see how those guys would turn tail and run from those hornets. And God does things, never does things usually, I should say, usually doesn't do things in the manner and in the way we think he should. He has a different plan. Whoever thought of manna? God goes, these people need to eat. I got an idea. Let's do manna. I mean, what a great idea. One time they were complaining, man, we just need some meat. I'd have to be careful because I love meat. I might be one of those guys, right, complaining, man, God, can we have a steak or something? I like meat. But anyway, they were complaining. God goes, okay, I'll give them a bunch of birds. You guys want meat? You got more meat than you can eat. And they just flooded in, flocks of them. God does things in amazing ways, and he will do some things between now and the return of Christ that will blow our minds. And it'll be exciting. But if we're not on this path, if we're not continuing down the right road, and we're back out in the world, we're going to miss out on that. And the young people who have walked away from this are going to kick themselves someday and say, why didn't I stay? I was there. I had the opportunity. Look at Matthew 13. Matthew 13 talks about a parable, and the parable here is the parable of the sower. And this parable shows us how different people react differently to their calling. And young people, God is extending to you a calling, okay? Now, you can respond to that calling and take that calling up, or you can walk away from it. But God has opened your mind to the truth. You understand what I'm talking about today. And you understand spiritual concepts because God has opened your mind to do that. There are people that are in class with you or at school or in college or wherever, even the teachers who don't get it. You know, they're teaching evolution. We know that's garbage. There's many things they teach that we know are not right because the Bible contradicts it. The Bible trumps it, and God's right and they're wrong. And they're highly educated. But your minds, you get it. You go, no, that's not true. I know. God said only a fool believes there is no God. And you understand these principles. But in this parable that we read about, let's see here. Got to get to the right spot. Matthew 13, verse 18. It says, "Therefore hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who receives seed by the wayside. But he who received the seed on stony places, this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures only for a while. For when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he stumbles. He's offended, he leaves. Now he who receives seed among the thorns is he who hears the word, and the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. But he who receives seed on good ground is he who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and produces, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. You know, how come everybody doesn't produce the same amount? How come some 30? How come some 60? Why are some 100-fold? What you do in life matters. What you do every day, the decisions you make, whether right or wrong, to uphold God's laws or not, will make a difference in your ultimate reward. You are rewarded according to your works. Now, we can't earn salvation. Salvation is a gift. We are saved by the grace of God. We are justified or made right with God because He wants to do that, not because He has to. It's not that we are righteous in and of ourselves. We understand all that. But you are going to be rewarded according to your works. And some produce more, some produce less, some are all in. They're totally committed. They're 100-fold. I don't know why anybody would want to be 30 or 60. That's just not good enough. Let's go for the 100. Now, maybe we don't make it. Maybe we're like 85-fold. But the more we obey God, the more we uphold His laws, and God will put us in situations where He's going to test us. There'll be peer pressure to do the wrong thing, to say the wrong thing, to deny God. Where are you going? You guys leaving? You're leaving in the fall. Where are you going? Oh, it's a church convention. Oh, we're on vacation. We're going on vacation. Well, not really. You're going to the Feast of Tabernacles. Just say it. What's that? Well, if you want to know, I'll give you a quick rundown on that. But basically, it's our fall holy days, and we go for 8 days to a feast site, and we have a great time. And we have church every day, but we also have a good time. Get a chance to fellowship and do some fun things. You know, as a young person, it's easy to deny God. I mean, even little kids could say, I'll go ahead and color the Christmas art, or I'm just going to go ahead and do the Easter thing. I mean, I'll look weird if I don't. But often kids in the church when they're little have great character, and they're like, nah, it's pagan. I can't do that. I don't do Christmas art. I'm not in that. I can't do the Halloween thing. No, we don't do that. And you're like, wow, they're not ashamed. And then we get a little older, and peer pressure's there, and then we are ashamed, and we hide, and we have no character. Don't be that person. Don't be more like Joshua. Be more like Caleb. Again, promote God's way of life. Lift it up. You know, when we read again about Joshua, and we see that he was 85 years old when he took command of Israel, He had been thoroughly trained for the job. Joshua, by the way, also, when Moses went up to receive the Ten Commandments, Joshua accompanied him to a certain point. And then Moses said, just wait here until I get back. And Moses didn't come back for a long time. Did Joshua go, oh, he must have died, I'm out of here? No, he was faithful, he was loyal, he just stayed there. He knew God was with him. I don't know what's taken so long, but I ain't going anywhere. And he was there when Moses came back. The people down in the valley, oh, he must have died. The animal ate him, something happened, and they're down there building a golden calf and doing everything wrong. Not Joshua. Where would you have fit in that whole thing? What if you were down in the valley? Would you go along with it? Or would you separate yourself from that? You know, God says flee fornication, right? Joseph literally fled from Potiphar's wife. He had to get out of there. You know, she kept his coat and then falsely accused him. But that was part of the plan. God goes, this, I'm going to watch this. I'm going to really promote this guy now. And in the end, God delivered him and God promoted him, and it was an incredible story. But here Joshua was 85 years old when he took the job. He had proved for more than 40 years that he would faithfully follow God and lead the people in a good direction. And now it's time, finally, to enter the promised land. For nearly a quarter of a century, 25 years, Joshua led Israel as they settled into the promised land. When we read the Old Testament, there's probably no comparable 25-year period in the history of ancient Israel where God's laws were more applied than during that period. And finally, at the age of 110, Joshua was old. He was growing physically weak. Knowing he was about to die, he assembled the elders of Israel, and he gave this memorable speech and the words that are the theme for our Christian living class. The Bible goes on to say in verse 31 of Joshua 24 that even the elders and the people that outlived Joshua continued on that right path because of his strength of leadership. And that probably was another 2 or 3 decades that Israel was going down the right path. And then finally, gradually, over time, they derailed and they went right back into idolatry. They went right back into all kind of immorality. The path to compromise always ends badly. Don't compromise. And that's what happened with Israel. They began to compromise. They began to erode spiritually. You've got to pass every test. If it's that Friday night music rehearsal or that Friday night baseball game or wrestling match and the sun's about to set, you've got to walk away. You're not going to wrestle on the Sabbath. You're not going to play in that, skit or in that production or in that music concert, because the sun's going to set. We walk out of the gym or we walk out of the hall. We'll do what we can until it's time to go, and then we got to go. As a young person, are you going to marry somebody who puts God first in their life so that you have a household that's godly? Are you going to follow God's instructions in that way, or just no? I'm just going to do what I want to do. I found this man or this woman, this young person. I'm just going to marry them. I know they keep Christmas. They have nothing to do with God. This will be a good marriage. No, it's not what God wants you to do. God comes first. His way of life comes first. We don't ever compromise, ever, on anything. And if we can learn to be that way, we'll be more like Joshua, and God can use us in a powerful way. Do you honor God by obeying your parents? God says to honor your parents, that your life may be long and things will go well. That's the kind of household Joshua had. Are you a person of strong faith? Do you trust God? Do you boldly face trials and tests, always giving God the glory for any success you have in your life? Do you live a life that's uncompromising when it comes to right and wrong, regardless of peer pressure, regardless of the crowd? Right is always right, even if everyone's against it, and wrong is always wrong, even if everyone's for it. And we live in a world where right and wrong are getting flipped upside down, where people don't even know if they're a man or a woman. Kansas City just put a brand new airport in, brand new one, beautiful. You get off the plane, I go to the restroom. I'm like, ooh, I'm in the wrong one. Sorry, I turned wrong. I go in the other one. No, I'm still in the wrong one. It's all gender bathrooms now. We're going to promote this way of life. We're going to push this evil, wrong, corrupt way of life on everybody. And so the only way you can do this is go in here. Or you can walk way down the hall, and guess what? There's still a men's and a women's. And I'm like, oh, good, there's one down there. I'll go down there. I want nothing to do with this. God's going to destroy this country. We're going into captivity because of our sins. Let's not be a part of that. Let's be separate from that. It won't be easy. You will be the outcast. You will be the one that is looked at as a weirdo. Or that's hate speech when you say what God says. No, that's not hate speech. That's love. God said it. We uphold that. If you can do that, you will contribute to a household that is described, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Let's live this way of life. Let's apply it. Let's be people of strong character, strong faith, and follow in the footsteps of Joshua.
For more information, go to our website at cogassembly.org. Copyright 2024, Church of God Assembly. All rights reserved.